Arthur Vance stood in the middle of the courtroom, the bucket still in his hand as the entire room fell silent. "I will defend him," he said, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and resolve. His calloused fingers tightened around the bucket handle as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. At the defendant's table, Damian Blackwood, the industrialist whose own counsel had just abandoned him, lifted his head and looked at him with utter disbelief. None of them knew that this simple moment would mark the beginning of the unraveling of one of the darkest conspiracies in global commerce history. Before we dive into this moving story of justice, courage, and rebirth, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. And if you believe that anyone, whether a powerful magnate or a quiet cleaner, deserves to be treated fairly under the law, don't forget to like and subscribe. Stories about silent heroes like Arthur deserve to be told, and you won't want to miss them. Now let's see what drove a forgotten legal prodigy to rise up against the very system that once crushed his life. But before everything began to shift, what do you think made Arthur, someone who had lost nearly everything, step out of the shadows at that exact moment? The winter sunlight of Chicago filtered through the tall windows of the Cook County Federal Courthouse, casting streaks of light across the granite floor that Arthur Vance had just finished polishing. 5 in the morning, just like every day for the past 14 years, he was already here. A 46-year-old man with black hair beginning to turn gray and intense blue eyes, dressed in a gray facility uniform with the word maintenance embroidered on the chest pocket. The tiny studio apartment in Evanston was still pitch black when he left at 4 o'clock a.m. The room had only a single bed, a small induction cooker, and a bare wall adorned with just one photo, the wedding picture of him and Lisa from 16 years ago before an accident took away the woman he loved. Beside it was a picture of their son, Max, now 19, and in his final year of university, though in the frame, he was only 6, smiling brightly in his mother's arms. Arthur didn't turn on the lights when he left home. Winter electricity bills were high, and with a salary of $300 a month, every penny mattered. Breakfast was just instant coffee, crackers, and food. He packed from the courthouse's basement snack bar, a small privilege for facility staff. That morning, as he pushed his cleaning cart down the 4th-floor hallway, Arthur paused in front of courtroom 405, what he considered the place of the biggest cases. And today, one of the most significant legal battles in Chicago history was set to begin. The lawsuit against Damian Blackwood, the industrialist worth $16 billion. He didn't hear about the case from the news. He didn't own a TV, but from the nights he spent cleaning that very courtroom. He had seen the slick lawyers, heard the things they said when they believed no one was listening. To them, the cleaner was just scenery, invisible, not worth noticing. But Arthur hadn't always been invisible. 14 years ago, he had been one of the rising stars at Sterling and Caldwell, a prestigious law firm in Chicago. He had a corner office overlooking Millennium Park, the reputation of never losing a major case, and a brilliant future until everything collapsed. He pushed the memories away. That was the past. Now he mopped floors, polished railings, emptied bins, an honest job that paid the rent, and allowed him to occasionally send a bit of money to Max, even though he always refused to take it. As Arthur was about to leave the courtroom, his phone buzzed. A message from the supervisor. "Vance, room 405 needs to be cleaned again. VIP today." Arthur exhaled. VIP meant pressure, inspections, and countless opportunities to get yelled at for the smallest mistake. But as always, he didn't complain. By 9 o'clock a.m., the courtroom was packed. Reporters squeezed in, lawyers straightened their ties. Keyboards clicked furiously. At the defense table, Damian Blackwood sat alone. He was 39, but looked as if he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. His once sharp brown eyes were now clouded with exhaustion. His bespoke suit was flawless, yet his slightly hunched shoulders and tightly clasped hands betrayed the tension consuming him. Next to him were 5 empty chairs, the seats reserved for his legal team from Sinclair, Hayes, and Roth, the most expensive firm in Chicago, charging $7,000 an hour, but they didn't show up. Arthur checked the clock. 9:15. The trial would begin in 15 minutes. Damian kept calling, and each time he put the phone down, his face grew paler. And Arthur knew they weren't coming. They had abandoned him. "All rise," the court officer announced. Judge Evelyn Cross entered, stern, cold, experienced. She paused when her eyes landed on the empty chairs and asked, "Mr. Blackwood, where is your legal team?" Damien stood, trying to stay composed, but his voice trembled. "I don't know, Your Honor. They were here yesterday. I've tried contacting them all morning, but no one answered." Prosecutor Victoria Bell rose, a thin, triumphant smile on her face. "Your Honor, it is clear the defense has been abandoned. We move for a default judgment." The courtroom erupted with murmurs. Reporters typed frantically. Judge Cross sighed. "If you have no legal representation, the court cannot delay indefinitely. I am forced to. I will defend him." The warm, deep voice cracked through the room like thunder. Everyone turned. Arthur Vance stood there next to his cleaning cart, the bucket still in his hand. The lights reflected off his graying hair, and his face, lined by 14 years of endurance, was now illuminated with determination. Chuckles broke out, first soft, then louder, but he didn't flinch. Arthur set the bucket down and walked up the aisle. 2 decades of mopping floors couldn't erase the posture of a lawyer who had once won major cases in this very room. Judge Cross raised an eyebrow. "Who are you?" "My name is Arthur Vance, Your Honor. I would like to represent Mr. Blackwood." Victoria Bell let out a mocking laugh. "A cleaner wants to be a lawyer." Arthur met her gaze. "I was a member of the Illinois Bar Association for 17 years. A wave of whispers spread across the room. Arthur pulled out his worn wallet and produced his old license, still valid. The judge examined it, her face paling slightly. "Mr. Vance, how long has it been since you practiced?" 14 years, Your Honor." The air grew heavier. The judge continued, "And you believe you are still competent?" "Your Honor, this man deserves to be defended. I know the law, I know procedure, and I understand what justice means." Damien stood. He looked into his eyes, not seeing desperation nor ambition, but sincerity, the kind that a $7,000 an hour legal team could never offer. "Yes, Your Honor," he said. "I accept, Mr. Vance." The courtroom erupted. Judge Cross rubbed her temples. "You have 15 minutes to confer with your client, and do not delay the proceedings." Arthur approached the defense table only to be blocked by security. "Sorry, only attorneys allowed in this area." Arthur held out his card. The judge nodded to confirm. The guard stepped aside awkwardly. When he sat down, Arthur felt every pair of eyes fixed on them, but he looked only at Damien. "Something is very wrong here," he whispered. "This isn't just about your lawyers abandoning you. Everything is orchestrated." Damien whispered back, "How do you know?" "Because I've seen thousands of cases over the last 14 years. This one isn't natural." "So who?" "We'll find out. But first, I need to hear everything." Damien looked at him, the man he had passed by every day without noticing. The man who stood up for him when no one else did. And for the first time since this nightmare began, he felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he had found the right person. 15 minutes passed, like 15 seconds. Damien spoke almost without pausing, trying to compress 4 months of legal preparation into an emergency briefing. He explained his technology, a hyper-efficient magnetic engine that operated at room temperature, a breakthrough capable of changing everything from vehicle power to factory automation to energy generation. He told him about Apex Dynamics, the company accusing him of stealing their technology, and he told him about the 4 months of hell since the allegations surfaced, stock prices plummeting, the press circling, partners turning their backs. Arthur listened without taking notes. He didn't just hear every word. He absorbed the pauses, the moments when his voice hitched. His deep blue eyes never left Damien's face. He realized he was doing more than listening to the content. He was reading him. The tension in his voice, the hesitation when mentioning certain details, and the absolute certainty when he spoke about the technology he had created. "Time's up," the clerk announced. Judge Cross struck the gavel. "Mr. Vance, prepare for your opening statement." Arthur rose and walked to the podium. He felt the full weight of every gaze in the room, some skeptical, some curious, some outright condescending. How many years had it been since he last stood here? How many nights had he lain awake in his small Evanston apartment, dreaming of a moment like this, only to wake up again with a bucket in his hand? He placed his hand on the podium, feeling the smooth wood beneath his palm. Drawing a deep breath, Arthur lifted his head and looked directly at the 12 faces in the jury box. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice calm and clear. "My name is Arthur Vance. First, I apologize for my appearance. I'm not wearing an expensive suit like my colleague across the aisle. I don't have a fancy office or a team of assistants. Less than an hour ago, I was still cleaning the floor of this courtroom." Soft laughter rippled from the back. Arthur heard it clearly but did not falter. "But for 14 years, I have stood in this room every day watching justice unfold. I have seen truth triumph and I have seen truth buried. I have learned that justice does not depend on the price of your suit or the name of the law firm you hire. It rests on something much simpler: the truth." He paused, letting the words settle. "And the truth in this case is simple. Damian Blackwood stole nothing. He created a revolutionary technology through his own intellect, toil, and talent. Meanwhile, those who truly wish to seize that technology are using the legal system as a weapon." Victoria Bell shot to her feet. "Objection. He's arguing, not delivering an opening statement." "Sustained," Judge Cross said. "Mr. Vance, keep your remarks to the facts." Arthur nodded. "My apologies, Your Honor. I will let the evidence speak for itself, and I promise you only this. By the end of this trial, it will be unmistakably clear who is telling the truth and who is lying." He sat down. It wasn't a polished opening, nor was it adorned with dazzling rhetoric, but it was sincere. And from the quiet nods of a few jury members, Arthur knew at least someone was truly listening. Victoria Bell stood for her opening statement. Tall, slender, with a smile sharp as glass, she walked to the podium as if it were her personal stage. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, her voice smooth as silk. "This case is not nearly as complicated as the defense wants you to believe. It is extremely simple. Theft." She walked slowly, her gaze sweeping across the faces before her. "Damian Blackwood stole proprietary inventions belonging to Apex Dynamics, a company that invested hundreds of millions of dollars developing magnetic engine technology. He used his connections in the industry to access internal research, copied the designs, and filed for patents under his own name." Bell paused, letting the accusation hang heavily in the air. "We will prove this with documents, expert testimony, and the accounts of his own former employees. By the end of this trial, there will be no doubt. Damian Blackwood is a thief, and thieves must be held accountable." She sat down with the confidence of someone who believed she had already won. The rest of the morning passed like a blurred nightmare. The prosecution called its first witness, a senior engineer, who claimed Damian's design was too similar to be a coincidence to Apex's internal records. When it came time for cross-examination, Arthur stood, feeling every muscle in his body tense. 14 years since he last did this. 14 years since he last stood before a witness, peeling back details one by one, searching for the smallest inconsistencies to unravel the bigger picture. But when he opened his mouth, something strange happened. The words returned naturally. Questions flowed into one another as if he had never left the profession. He guided the witness through overlapping details, mismatched timelines, technical logs the witness claimed to have seen but wasn't reasonably able to access. And as the contradictions began to emerge, Arthur felt something awaken inside him. Something he had buried for 14 years, the man he used to be, a lawyer. By the end of the day, Judge Cross looked at Arthur with a different expression, one with a hint of reluctant respect. "Mr. Vance," she said, "you might want a proper suit for tomorrow." Arthur nodded. "I'll take care of it, Your Honor." But as he left the courtroom, he knew the truth. He couldn't afford a new suit. The only suit he owned had been moldy in his closet for over a decade, and now hung loosely on him after years of physical labor. Damian caught up to him in the hallway. "Mr. Vance," he called. He turned. This time he looked at him not as a high-profile client, not as an industrialist on magazine covers, but as a human being clinging to his final thread of hope. He was taller than he expected, carrying the confident posture that money could buy. But in those sharp brown eyes, fear was something money couldn't hide. "Thank you," he said softly. I I don't know why you're doing all this, but thank you." Arthur shook his head. "Don't thank me yet. We've barely begun, and we need to talk seriously. I need to see every document related to this case, emails, notes, and schematics. If we're going to fight, I need to know everything. Damien nodded. Come to my place tonight. I keep everything there. I can't, Arthur replied. I have a work shift tonight. Damien frowned. A shift? But you're my lawyer. And I'm also a cleaner who needs to pay rent, Arthur said calmly. The court isn't paying me to defend you, Mr. Blackwood. This is pro bono, free of charge, which means I need to work if I don't want to get fired. For the first time, Damien truly felt the distance between his world and his. For him, paying $7,000 an hour for lawyers once felt normal. For this man, skipping a single shift could mean not having enough to pay rent. I'll pay you, he said immediately. No, Arthur answered firm. If this were about money, I wouldn't be here today. I'm not doing this for prestige or compensation. I'm doing it because it is the right thing to do. He paused for a beat, then added gently, but I'll come after my shift. Is midnight too late for you? Midnight is perfect, Damien said. And somewhere deep inside, both of them understood. The real battle had only just begun. At midnight, Arthur parked the old pickup truck in front of Damien's estate gate, still wearing his facility uniform, which carried the lingering scent of cleaning chemicals from his 8-hour shift. He hadn't had time to go home and change, and the truth showed in every dried sweat mark on his shoulders. This time, the gate guard had been told to expect him, but the way the man looked at Arthur's truck said everything. He didn't belong here. As he entered through the main door, another security officer escorted him, not to assist, but to make sure he didn't wander into restricted areas. Damien was waiting in his study, still in the suit he'd worn to court, though he'd removed the jacket. He looked exhausted in a way sleep couldn't fix. Tea? He asked. This time Arthur nodded. He needed the caffeine to stay alert. He poured him a cup from a sleek modern dispenser that cost more than his monthly rent. The flavor was rich, smooth, and unfamiliar compared to the instant coffee he drank every morning. All right, Arthur set the cup down. Tell me the real story. Not the version you told your lawyers, not the version for the media. The truth. Damien sat, his gaze fixed on his teacup as if it held the answers he'd been too afraid to confront. I started Dynamo Tech 11 years ago, he said, his voice softening as the memories pulled him backward. Back then, I was just a recent Stanford graduate obsessed with energy efficiency. Everyone told me that stable magnetic locomotion at room temperature was impossible. Friction was too high. They said only multi-million-dollar labs in extreme vacuum chambers could achieve anything close to that. Damien's eyes lit up when he talked about his work. The first time Arthur saw the real man beneath the armor of wealth and prestige. But I had an idea. What if instead of fighting the friction, we used it? What if the instability itself became part of the stabilization? He gave a small laugh, not sure whether it was pride or bitterness. They called me crazy. My mentor told me I was wasting my time. But you proved them wrong, Arthur said. Damien nodded lightly. 5 years working in a cramped garage, living on student loans, no funding, no lab, just me and my blueprint. He stood, opened a safe hidden behind a bookshelf, and pulled out a thin folder. Here, he handed it to him. All my original research notes, dated, notarized, everything. Proof that I developed this technology before Apex was even founded. Arthur opened the folder. Inside were hundreds of pages of equations, diagrams, handwritten notes, raw, vivid, undeniable. Why didn't your previous lawyers bring this up? He asked. They said it wasn't necessary, Damien replied, exhaustion in his voice. They said they had a better strategy. Arthur snapped the folder shut, jaw tightening. Not introducing your most critical evidence isn't a strategy, it's sabotage. Damien's face paled. You mean? I mean your lawyers were paid to lose, Arthur said plainly. The only question now is, who paid them? They worked until 3 o'clock in the morning, going through every email, memo, and schematic. The deeper they dug, the clearer the pattern became. Crucial evidence ignored, key witnesses never called, objections made at the wrong times, a defense strategy almost deliberately suicidal. Damien's former legal team wasn't incompetent. They were actively sabotaging him. Is there anything you haven't told me? Arthur asked. Anything strange that's happened in the past few months? Damien hesitated. There is one thing. Chris Palmer, my operations manager, he copied files onto an external hard drive. Arthur narrowed his eyes. And you didn't question him? I trusted him. Chris has been with me for 6 years. In cases like this, Arthur said slowly, nothing is accidental. If he copied data, someone put him up to it. He looked at Damien, his voice firm. Tomorrow, no matter what I say or ask in court, you must not react. No surprise, no correcting me. Everything is already part of the plan. Why? Because we're being watched, Arthur replied. Maybe not right this second, but somewhere, somehow. And every plan we make assumes the enemy already knows. A chill ran down Damien's spine. You've been through this, haven't you? Arthur was silent so long he thought he wouldn't answer. Then softly, 14 years ago, I took a case against Global Steel Consortium. A technician was whistleblowing about concealed structural flaws. 3 people died. I had enough evidence, but before the trial, the evidence vanished from my office. Damien held his breath. Arthur continued. They said I fabricated it. I forged documents to harm the company. I was suspended, then disbarred. It took me 3 years to prove my innocence, 3 years working odd jobs, 3 years watching my son grow up without his father fully present. They destroyed you, Damien whispered. They tried, Arthur corrected, but they didn't take the one thing that mattered, my knowledge of the law, and that's something they will never take from you. When Arthur left at 4 o'clock a.m., the sky was still smudged dark like spilled ink. Damien stood by the window watching the glow of his pickup truck fade down the long road. It wasn't the first time he felt alone in this fight, but for the first time in months, in that darkness, he felt something he had almost forgotten. Hope. The next morning, Arthur walked into the courthouse wearing the suit he had bought from a thrift shop the night before. It wasn't new, it wasn't fancy, but it was clean, pressed, and presentable. 20 he could barely afford. But Judge Cross had been right. Today, he needed to look like a real attorney. The courtroom was packed. The story of the cleaner turned lawyer had spread across the city, and reporters squeezed into every available space. When Arthur entered, a few people even clapped, hesitant, uncertain, torn between cheering and mocking. He ignored all of it. He focused on the only thing that mattered, the truth. Victoria Bell was ready. A deep forest green power suit, squared shoulders, sharp eyes, the look of someone who believed the verdict was already hers. The prosecution calls Dr. Leonard Hayes, she announced. R. Hayes stepped onto the witness stand. A man in his 50s, wire-rimmed glasses, the polished air of an academic. For nearly 20 minutes, Bell let him construct a narrative in which he had developed the core principles of the magnetic technology, and Damien had stolen the credit. Apex Dynamics, he claimed, was where the idea truly began. Arthur sat still, taking notes, expression unreadable. But inside he was assembling the puzzle, the timelines, the claims, the inconsistencies, and none of it aligned. When his turn came, Arthur rose slowly. He carried a thin file, walking to the lectern with a calmness so steady it silenced the room. Dr. Hayes, he began, voice gentle but firm, you testified that you developed Apex Dynamics' core principles from February through April of 2020. Correct. That's correct. Then please help me clarify something. Arthur lifted the first document. This is your employment record with Apex Dynamics. Would you read your start date for the court? Hayes glanced down and his face drained of color. May 15th, 2020. I'm sorry, Arthur said softly. I didn't catch that. May 15th, he repeated louder, his voice trembling. Arthur turned to the jury. So you could not have developed principles between February and April because you weren't employed yet. A ripple of shock spread across the courtroom. Arthur held up a second document. And here are the technical logs from Dynamo Tech. They show the core principles were completed on April 10th, 2020, more than a month before you were hired. Would you like to explain how you contributed to a project that existed before you did? Bell leapt to her feet. Objection. The prosecution did not receive this document. Your Honor, Bayan, Arthur said calmly, these came directly from Dynamo Tech's archives. If they failed to review the evidence available to them, that is not my fault. Objection overruled, Judge Cross said. Proceed. Hayes' hands began to shake. Arthur fixed his gaze on him. Dr. Hayes, one final question. Did you receive a payment of 3,000 from Global Steel Consortium 2 weeks before testifying here today? Hayes froze. That was, yes or no, doctor. I was compensated for my time in XBRTC. 350,000 from Global Steel Consortium TBU, weeks before testifying here today? Hayes froze. That was, yes or no, doctor. Was compensated for my time and XBRTIs. 350,000 for false testimony, Arthur said, voice sharp as steel. Sounds more like a bribe than compensation. The room erupted. Arthur turned back to the judge. Your Honor, I move to enter evidence of this transaction and request that the witness be charged with perjury. Gasps, shouts, furious typing from reporters. The courtroom felt like it had detonated, and for the first time since the trial began, Arthur saw something he had been waiting for. Fear in the eyes of Victoria Bell. They had never expected that a cleaner would know how to tear their entire case apart. After the hearing, Arthur and Damien stepped out of the courthouse into a forest of cameras and microphones. Reporters shouted questions from every direction, flash after flash, bursting like lightning in a storm. Arthur lowered his head, placing a light hand on Damien's back, skillfully guiding him through the chaotic crowd. Only when the car door shut, blocking out the noise, did Damien finally breathe out. How did you know about the payment to Hayes? He asked, still shaken. Arthur opened his old canvas briefcase, not the leather kind, but the kind he'd bought from a thrift store. I didn't know for sure, he said calmly, but in cases like this, money always leaves a trail. I guessed, and the look in his eyes confirmed it. You bluffed. Damien stared at him, genuinely surprised. Almost. Arthur shrugged lightly, but after I saw his reaction, I had someone double-check. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his messages. My son Max, he works in data analysis, but his ability to dig up information is remarkable. Ever since I told him about this case, he's been investigating. His phone buzzed. A new message from Max. Dad, I found something big. Call me. Arthur looked up, turning to Damien. We need to meet my son right now. An hour later, they sat in a small diner in Evanston, a space as foreign to Damien as another planet. The diner was cramped, plastic booths squeaked, and the smell of cheap coffee mixed with old frying oil. But most importantly, it was private. No reporters, no cameras, no lawyers. Max Vance walked in. Arthur stood up abruptly, awkward like a father, unsure whether he still had the right to hug his son. Max resolved it first. He stepped forward and hugged him. A quick, slightly hesitant hug, but a real one. He was 19 with long black hair and eyes like his father's. Jeans, a simple t-shirt, but carrying an expensive laptop and the confident walk of someone who knew his worth. Dad, he said, then turned to Damien. And you must be Damien Blackwood. I'm Max. They shook hands. Damien couldn't help noticing the contrast. His well-maintained hands softened by luxury skincare facing the practical work-built hands of Max, a young man who had built his own life from the ground up. Max opened his laptop. Okay, at first I wasn't sure what Dad wanted me to look for, so I started with Apex Dynamics, he said. On the surface, they're spotless. A venture-funded tech startup with a very tidy corporate history. She scrolled through a series of documents. But when I dug into the ownership structure, things got strange. Apex is owned by a shell company in Nevada. That company is owned by another in the British Virgin Islands. And that company, he paused, is owned by Global Steel Consortium. Arthur froze. Global Steel, he repeated. You know them? Max asked. Oh yes, Arthur said quietly. They're the company that destroyed my career 14 years ago. Max stared at him, eyes wide. They had never truly spoken openly about it, about what happened, about who was behind it. It was them all along, he whispered. Damien leaned forward. But why would a heavy industry company care about my technology? At first, I didn't get it either, Max said. But then I read more about your tech. He turned the laptop so both Damien and Arthur could see. It's not just vehicle power. If you can stabilize magnetic engines at room temperature, the manufacturing applications, he pulled up a scientific article, are game-changing. He pointed to a highlighted section. A Caltech professor wrote that your technology could revolutionize factory automation and logistics. It could make traditional manufacturing methods obsolete within 15 years. 15 years, Damien repeated, each word heavier than the last. And global steel makes $30 billion a year from conventional manufacturing and heavy machinery. Max finished. If your technology works as published, they don't just lose profit, they lose their entire empire. Arthur leaned back as if the pieces had finally clicked into place. That's why they didn't try to buy you out or compete with you, he said slowly. They needed to erase you, erase your technology, erase your credibility. But more than that, Max continued, I kept digging. Global Steel has ties to 5 other major industrial conglomerates, 2 government contractors, and, he paused again, 3 sitting members of the Senate Commerce Committee. Max pulled up more documents, images of campaign contributions, fundraising dinners, lavish trips. They've built a network, and when your technology came into view, they activated that entire network. What about the lawyers? Damien asked, his voice cracking. How did they? I'm still tracing it, Max said, but the managing partner at Sinclair, Hayes and Roth, he sits on the board of a subsidiary of Global Steel. The information isn't easy to find, but it's there if you know where to dig. Arthur stood and began pacing the cramped diner, his mind moving as fast as Max's words. So this isn't just a lawsuit, he said. This is a coordinated campaign to clear the path for a multi-trillion-dollar industry. And they won't stop, Damien said, fear now clearly visible in his eyes. If they did this to you 14 years ago, if they can manipulate things to this extent, he didn't finish. He didn't need to. All 3 of them understood. Max's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and his face drained. It's my old boss. He says I don't need to come back to the office. My belongings will be mailed to me. They fired you? Damien asked. On paper, it's position eliminated, Max said bitterly. But the timing says everything. Arthur placed a hand on his son's shoulder. I'm sorry, Max. I never wanted to pull you into this. Max looked up, his eyes steadier than before. You didn't pull me into anything. I chose this, and now that I'm in, I'm helping you fight. For the first time in years, Arthur didn't see Max as the child who had lost his mother, or the grown man he had missed for too many years. He saw something else, an ally, a partner. All right, he said, exhaling as if sealing a decision. Then we do this together. In the days that followed, the threats were no longer a vague feeling. They became clear signs, sharp and dangerous enough to make Arthur's stomach tighten every time he thought about them. His small apartment in Evanston was broken into. Nothing was stolen. There was nothing of value to take, but everything was torn apart. The closet yanked open, drawers dumped onto the floor, the mattress slashed with a long, deep cut, as if someone wanted to send a message. We know where you live. Max's laptop was hacked. Thankfully, he had backed up all his data to an encrypted cloud server. But the fact that someone had intentionally breached his device and done it blatantly sent a chill down his spine. Then one night, as Damien left the office late, a dark sedan ran a red light and sped straight toward his car. His driver swerved in time. The car spun, crashing into a retaining wall to avoid a head-on collision. Damien escaped with only scrapes and bruises, but the message was carved in stone. He was a target. During an emergency meeting at Damien's estate the next morning, he said clearly, "You need to get out of your apartment. Arthur, Max, you both need to move here where I have real security." "We can't just live in your home like that," Arthur began, clearly uncomfortable. "I don't want to owe you anything else." "This isn't a favor," Damien cut in firmly. "This is a defensive strategy. They're attacking us individually. If we stay together with professional security, we're safer." Max placed a hand on his father's arm. "He's right, Dad. How am I supposed to work if I keep worrying someone will break in every night?" Reluctantly, Arthur agreed. That afternoon, they moved into the guest house on Damien's estate, a smaller, separate building, but still bigger than anywhere Arthur had ever lived in his life. While Max excitedly explored the rooms, Arthur remained in the living room, back straight, but hands unconsciously tightening. The high ceilings, designer furniture, expensive art on the walls, all of it made him feel like an ink blot on a perfect canvas. He stared out through the glass doors into the meticulously trimmed garden. It was hard to believe that just 48 hours earlier, he'd been in an apartment barely big enough for one person to turn around in. Damien entered the room and stopped beside him. "You're uncomfortable," he observed without needing to ask. "I've lived 14 years in a small apartment," Arthur said in a low voice. "And this place? This isn't my world." Damien stood beside Arthur for a long moment, as if giving him time to breathe in this unfamiliar space. Then he spoke gently. "Maybe it should be your world. You have talent, strength, Mr. Vance. You could have been in a place like this, or far better if they hadn't taken everything from you." Arthur turned toward him, and for the first time since they met in the courtroom, he truly looked at Damien, not as a client, not as an industrialist, but as a man fighting for justice alongside him. His brown eyes, though tired, gleamed with something rare, genuine respect. "I don't need any of this," Arthur replied, his voice firm. "I never did. I want justice. I want to help people who have no voice. And after all these years, I finally have a chance to do that again." "By helping me," Damien said. "By fighting those who believe money and power place them above the law," Arthur corrected. They stood silently in the wide living room, the afternoon sunlight filtering softly through the large glass wall. The distance between their worlds, a cleaner who used to be a lawyer and an industrialist tech founder, was still there. But in that moment, it didn't feel as impossible as before. Something had shifted, not because of what they said, but because they were standing side by side, facing a common enemy. And in that silence, they knew the real battle had only just begun. The next major breakthrough came from a place no one could have imagined. At 2 in the morning, Chris Palmer, Damien's longtime operations manager, appeared at the gate, his face pale, clothes disheveled, hair blown out as if he had been out in the wind all night. Security immediately informed Damien, and he hurried to wake Arthur. They met Chris in a small room separate from the main house, a safety measure in case this was a trap. Chris nearly collapsed when he saw Damien. His eyes were red with tears, his hands trembling violently. "I'm sorry," he blurted out at once. "I'm so sorry." "For what?" Damien asked, his voice sharp as steel. Chris took a deep breath. "For everything, for copying the files, for passing information to them, for staying silent when I knew what they were doing to you." "Who is they?" Arthur asked. "Marcus Stone," Chris replied, his voice. "The CEO of Apex Dynamics. He came to see me 7 months ago. He knew about my mistake." "What mistake?" Damien asked. Chris looked down at his hands, too ashamed to lift his head. 9 years ago, before I worked for you, I worked at another company. I misused $60,000. Not a lot, but still a crime. I paid the money back, and the company didn't call the police. I thought it was over." "But Stone found out," Arthur said. Chris nodded, tears spilling again. "He had documents, emails, bank statements, everything. He told me that if I didn't help him, he'd turn me in. I would go to prison." "So you chose to help him?" Damien said, his tone flat. "I copied the data. I told him your strategies. Chris choked up. "I even planted false information in some files to make it look like you accessed Apex research." "Fabricated evidence," Arthur said darkly. "Exactly what they once did to me." "But why come here now?" Damien asked, his gaze icy, but with a trace of pity. Chris pulled out a phone, not his own, but a high-end model completely out of place in his pocket. Arthur recognized it immediately. This wasn't Chris's personal phone. "Today," Chris said, his hand shaking, "I accidentally overheard Stone on the phone. He told someone about a permanent solution if the legal route failed." He swallowed hard. "They were talking about killing you, Damien." The room suddenly felt freezing. "I know what I did was wrong. I know I betrayed you," Chris continued, voice breaking. "But I can't live with this, not with murder." He handed the phone to Arthur. "This is Stone's phone. I took it from his office. It has everything, messages, emails, and call recordings. The whole conspiracy." Arthur took the phone, feeling as if he were holding a grenade with the pin pulled. This could end the case. "Or end us," Max said from the doorway. He had arrived without anyone noticing. "If they realize he took it." "They will know," Chris whispered. "Stone will search for the phone by morning, if not sooner. He'll notice it's gone. That's why I came straight here. Damien stared at Chris for a long moment. This man had been by his side for 6 years through stressful meetings, funding rounds, and sleepless nights. And now he was the one who had stabbed him in the back. But in those tear-filled eyes in front of him, Damien saw not just fear, he saw remorse, real and deep. "You risked your own safety to come here," Damien said, his voice softening for the first time. "I owe you more than that," Chris replied, trembling. "You gave me a chance when no one else would. You trusted me, and I betrayed that. This is the least I can do." Arthur didn't hesitate. "We need to copy every piece of data on this phone immediately. Max, can you do it?" "Give me 15 minutes, which Max said, already opening his laptop. While Max worked, Arthur asked Chris, "You know they'll come looking for you, right?" Chris nodded. "I know. You need to disappear at least until the case is over." "I have a relative in Vancouver," Chris said. "I can go there." "Go now. Don't go home. Don't pack. Go straight there." 20 minutes later, all the data had been safely backed up into Max's encrypted server. In the darkness, Chris left in a taxi, never looking back. Arthur watched the car until its taillights vanished, wondering whether they were right to trust him and whether he would survive the night. Damien stood beside him, his voice soft but steady. "He truly is sorry." "Sorry doesn't erase the damage," Arthur said bluntly. "No," Damien agreed, "but courage can redeem it." He knew they would retaliate and still came here. Arthur drew a long breath, his jaw tightening with iron determination. "Now we have to use what he gave us, and we need to move fast, because once they realize we have this evidence." He looked down at the phone in his hand, the live proof of a massive conspiracy. "They'll come at us with everything they have." They didn't have to wait long. The next morning, as Arthur, Max, and Damien were reviewing every piece of evidence inside Marcus Stone's phone, the estate's security alarms abruptly screamed through the intercom system. "Breach at the main gate," the security director reported. "Multiple individuals armed." Damien shot to his feet, locked down the entire property, and called the police. But as the security screens switched angles, the truth became unmistakable. 6 men in tactical uniforms, fully equipped, moving through the estate with the precision of people who had clearly received military training. "They're not police," Arthur said, his voice dropping. "Mercenaries," said Jenkins, the head of security. "Ex-military or private contractors. They know exactly what they're doing." "We have to get out of here," Max panicked. But the cameras showed 2 more vehicles blocking the back exit. No escape route left. Jenkins, formerly state police, now head of Damien's security, made a decision immediately. "Safe room. Move now." He led them across the house down to the basement, unlocking a steel door hidden behind a storage shelf. Inside was a compact panic room, reinforced concrete walls, surveillance monitors, and a direct hardline to 911. "You'll be safe in here. This door can withstand explosives," Jenkins said. "My team and I will hold them off as long as we can. Police are on their way." "Earliest arrival is 12 minutes, Jenkins replied. "We only need to survive 12. The door shut behind them with a cold metallic clack. Inside the panic room, the 3 stared at the surveillance screens. The mercenaries moved like shadows, silent, methodical, each step calculated. Jenkins and the 4 guards under him were already in defensive positions. "They're going to die," Max whispered, his hands trembling. "Those men are outgunned and outnumbered." "Jenkins knows how to fight," Damien said, trying to sound steady, but his voice shook. Then the gunfight began. On the monitors, the battle unfolded like a nightmare stripped of sound. Jenkins and his team fought fiercely using every corridor and blind spot, but the intruders were professionals moving with flawless formation. 1 guard fell, 1 mercenary went down, but the attackers kept advancing. "They're heading for the basement," Arthur said. "They know we're here. How do they—" Damien stopped mid-sentence, his face draining of color. "Chris, he must have told them about the safe room. Or they had the floor plans from day one," Max said quickly. "Either way, they know." Arthur looked around the room. 1 door, no windows, no backup exit, no weapons. They were trapped inside a metal coffin waiting to be opened. On screen, a mercenary placed a device on the basement door. "They're planting explosives," Max said, terror rising in his voice. Arthur dialed 911. "We're under attack at 389 Lakeshore Drive." Multiple armed assailants with explosives. We need immediate support. The nearest unit is 4 minutes out, the operator said. Stay inside. 4 minutes, but the explosives would blow in less than one. Damien squeezed Arthur's hand. If this is how it ends, it isn't. He cut him off. We've come too far. We don't end like this. Just as the device began to blink, seconds from detonation, an unexpected image flashed onto the monitors. Police vehicles, then more police vehicles, then SWAT armored trucks. Not one or two, but nearly an entire strike force pouring into the estate. The mercenaries saw it too. They halted, exchanged hand signals, then retreated, disappearing as quickly as they arrived, leaving the explosive behind, still untriggered. They're running! Max almost screamed in disbelief. 10 minutes later, SWAT secured the property, disarmed the device, and cleared every structure. When the panic room door finally opened, Arthur, Damien, and Max stepped out, faces pale but alive. A tall man in an FBI jacket was waiting, badge partially visible. Agent David Hollister, Mr. Blackwood. Mr. Vance, I'm glad you're safe, he said. Damien immediately asked, how did you get here so fast? We've been monitoring Marcus Stone and his associates for weeks, Hollister said. When a taxi driver reported transporting a man matching Chris Palmer's description toward the Canadian border, we knew something major had happened. We deployed a team immediately. Is he safe? Damien asked softly. Chris, he's under protective custody in Vancouver, Hollister said, and he's agreed to testify in exchange for immunity. Arthur exhaled, years of weight releasing from his chest. So we have enough to bring them down. More than enough, Hollister replied, a thin, controlled smile forming. We arrested Marcus Stone, 3 Global Steel executives, and 5 other accomplices within the last hour with the data from his phone, Palmer's testimony, and this attack. He straightened, his voice firm. They're going to prison for a very, very long time. The next morning, when Arthur stepped into the courtroom, the atmosphere had completely changed. There were no longer curious stares treating him like a novelty. What replaced them was a quiet respect from the reporters. Even the prosecution attorneys looked drained, as though they had just survived a battle they knew they could never win. Judge Matthew Rohr, assigned after judge, cross-recused herself due to a conflict of interest, struck his gavel to open the session. I am aware there were significant developments overnight, he said. Prosecutor Victoria Bell rose. Her shoulders nearly collapsed. Your Honor, in light of the new arrests and the evidence presented this morning, the prosecution moves to dismiss all charges against Mr. Blackwood. The courtroom exploded. Reporters shouted. Camera flashes burst like lightning. Arthur remained seated, watching Bell with a strange sense of sympathy. She too had been a pawn in a game far larger than she could have comprehended. The motion is granted, Judge Rohr declared. Mr. Blackwood, you are free. And Mr. Vance, he paused, eyes lingering on Arthur. This court has never witnessed such a remarkable act in pursuit of justice. You are deserving of every recognition that will follow. As they walked out of the courtroom, Damien turned to Arthur, tears shimmering in his eyes. We did it. We actually won. You won, Arthur said gently. You never gave up, not even when everything looked hopeless. Max wrapped his arms around both of them, breaking the solemnity. No, we won as a team. 2 months later, Arthur stood outside a building on Michigan Avenue, looking up at the freshly mounted sign, Vance and Vance Legal, Anti-Corruption and Consumer Rights. Max stood beside him, holding a brand new law textbook. After everything he had witnessed, he had enrolled in law school, a decision born directly from the trial that changed their lives. Do you think we can really run this place? Max asked. We can, Arthur said. We already have our first 3 clients. All of the people who were turned away because they couldn't afford an attorney. Max smiled. Thanks to the Blackwood Legal Justice Fund. Damien had not only founded the fund with an initial $18 million contribution, he had rallied support from tech CEOs across the industry who had followed the trial closely. The fund would sponsor civil rights cases across America. As they entered the still empty office, Arthur heard the sound of heels behind him. Damien stood at the door holding a bottle of vintage scotch. I thought we should celebrate a little, he said, his warm smile filling the bare room. Max understood immediately. I'll go look for some glasses. It might take a while. Then he slipped away, leaving Arthur and Damien alone in the quiet office. They stood side by side in the unfinished room, wrapped in the peace that follows a storm. I never properly thanked you, Damien said softly, for standing up that day, for believing in me when everyone else turned their backs. There's nothing to thank, Arthur replied. You gave me something I thought I had lost forever, a purpose. Over the past 2 months, through investigations, press conferences, and work for the foundation, something had shifted between them. It began as respect, then friendship. And now, standing here in the gentle afternoon light streaming through the windows, it had become something deeper. Arthur, he said, calling him by his first name for the very first time. I know we come from two different worlds. I know people will talk, but I've realized the only thing that truly matters. What is it? He asked quietly. That the world doesn't matter. People's opinions don't matter. What matters is finding someone who understands you, stands beside you, and makes you a better version of yourself. He paused, then continued in a whisper. And I found that person. Arthur's heart stalled. Since Lisa died 15 years ago, he had never once allowed himself to love again. He buried the grief, buried the hope, buried the idea that he was worthy of another chance. But Damien, who had seen past the cleaner's uniform, past the scars, had broken through every wall. I live a completely different life, Arthur said softly. I have nothing but integrity, Damien interrupted gently, and courage and kindness, and a heart that knows how to fight for what's right. He touched his hand. I had money and success. What I didn't have was someone who saw me as a human being. Arthur looked down at their hands, one soft, one calloused, different yet fitting together with impossible ease. Lisa was the love of my youth, he said. I thought that part of my life was over. But, Damien asked, his voice nearly a breath. But maybe we are given more than one chance, he said, if we're brave enough to take it. They stood there in a silence so gentle it felt like the world had paused outside. Then Arthur leaned in, slow, careful, tender. The kiss was a promise from two people who had been broken, had lost so much, yet still found the courage to hope again. Max's voice suddenly echoed from the back room. I can't find any glasses. We might have to buy some. Arthur and Damien burst into laughter, the private moment dissolving into warm ease. Come on, Damien said, taking Arthur's hand. Let's show your son his new office, and maybe tonight the three of us can go out to dinner. I'd like that, Arthur said. Before stepping out, he paused at the door, looking once more at the sign, Vance and Vance Legal. A new beginning, a second chance. No, he corrected himself silently, a second life. Arthur Vance's story reminds us that it is never too late to begin again, that justice isn't measured by wealth or status, but by courage and the unshakable will to fight back. That heroes come in many forms, sometimes wearing cleaning gloves instead of a tailored suit. He shows us that failure is not the end, that betrayal can be overcome, and that even after the deepest losses, love can still find its way back. Most importantly, Arthur proves that every one of us has the power to stand up, to speak out, and to fight for what is right, no matter who tries to silence us. If you were in Arthur's place, what would you choose? A stable corporate job with a high salary, or starting a new path to defend those who have no voice? Share your answer below. And if this story of perseverance and justice moved you, don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next extraordinary stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things on Ebon Stories. And share this video with someone who needs a reminder that one person standing up for what's right can change the world. Thank you for watching. I will defend him. And remember, justice doesn't always wear an expensive suit, and love can bloom in the most unexpected places. Never give up hope, never stop fighting, and never underestimate the power of one good person with the courage to stand tall.